251. That's the total number of A380s Airbus ever built. All of them, first to last. When the assembly line stopped in December 2021, there were no orders left. On the other side, the Boeing 787 has accumulated over 1,130 orders. The queue of airlines waiting to receive the aircraft stretches beyond 10 years of production. Both were born to solve the same problem. Both cost decades of development. Both promise to redefine air travel. The result of one fits in a parking lot. The other doesn't fit in a factory. The two were treated as competitors, but when you compare what each one promised, the competition stops making sense. One was betting that the future of aviation was carrying more people at once. The other was betting that the future was carrying people to more places. The distance between those two sentences defined the fate of tens of billions of dollars. What happened between those two bets is not a story about airplanes. It's about what happens when a company tries to solve the wrong problem with the right engineering. In the late 90s, global air traffic was doubling every 15 years. Heathrow was already operating at capacity. Charles de Gaulle couldn't add more slots. JFK was stacking 3-hour delays on normal days. The problem was visible. The big airports were getting too small. The logic at the time was simple. Most airlines operated on the hub-and-spoke model, a system where passengers from smaller cities fly to a large central airport, connect, and continue to their final destination. It's like a bicycle wheel. The spokes bring everything to the center, and from the center it goes anywhere. If a passenger wants to go from Nashville to Milan, they fly first to Atlanta, switch planes, and continue to Italy. Each spoke feeds the hub, and the hub feeds everything. That model worked for decades. The more traffic grew, the bigger the hub, but it had a physical limit. There comes a point where you can't add more flights because there's no runway, no gate, no room in the sky. The airport becomes the bottleneck. And that's where Airbus placed its bet. If the bottleneck was the number of flights, the solution was to put more people on each flight. An airplane with 500, 600, up to 800 passengers would eliminate the problem without needing more takeoffs. The A380 was born from that idea. The initial budget was 8.8 billion euros. Airbus set up an operation across 4 countries: wings in the United Kingdom, fuselage sections in Germany and France, stabilizer in Spain, everything transported by barge, road, and cargo plane to Toulouse for final assembly. What they were building wasn't just the largest commercial airplane in history, it was the infrastructure to prove that the future fit inside a hub. But for the A380 to operate, the hubs needed to adapt. Runways had to be widened, taxiways reinforced to support the weight. Each gate needed 3 jet bridges instead of 1. The Port Authority of New York spent millions of dollars just to prepare JFK, and the airports paid because they believed in the same thesis. The future was the hub. The bigger the hub, the easier the system. The bigger the airplane, the cheaper per passenger. Economies of scale were the anchor of everything. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Boeing was looking at the same growing traffic and seeing a different answer. In 2001, Boeing announced the Sonic Cruiser, an airplane with science fiction shapes that would fly at Mach 0.98, just under the speed of sound. The idea was to win the race not through size but through speed, cut flight time by 20%, make New York to Tokyo feel like New York to London. Airlines listened, they liked it, but they didn't sign contracts. After the September 11th attacks, air traffic collapsed, oil prices started climbing, and the math changed. Airlines didn't want to arrive faster, they wanted to arrive cheaper. Speed became a luxury, efficiency became survival. Boeing canceled the Sonic Cruiser in December 2002, but the program had already developed a technology that no commercial airplane used at scale: carbon fiber and advanced composite structures. 50% of the next airplane structure would be made from this material, reducing weight by roughly 7 to 9 tons compared to an equivalent aluminum airplane. Less weight, less fuel, more possibilities. Boeing renamed the project to 7E7, then 787, then Dreamliner. The airplane that was going to fly near the speed of sound turned into the airplane that would fly farther while burning less. The A380 entered service in October 2007 with Singapore Airlines, and it did exactly what it promised. The cabins were spacious, airlines filled the planes. Emirates built its entire operation around it, over 100 units in service, all routing through Dubai. The hub worked. Airbus delivered as many as 30 A380s in a single year. Orders reached a peak of 340 units. The airports that had invested in infrastructure were seeing returns. The model seems validated. Seemed. In September 2011, 4 years after the A380, All Nippon Airways received the first 787. The airplane was visibly smaller, capacity for 240 to 330 passengers, depending on configuration. Next to an A380, it looked modest, but what the 787 could do changed the equation. With 25% less fuel consumption than previous generation aircraft and the range exceeding 14,000 kilometers, it made routes viable that no A380 could ever serve. Not because it was bigger, because it was viable even with fewer people on board. When United looked at Newark, it saw a classic problem. There was demand from passengers wanting to fly direct from Newark to cities in Asia, the Middle East, continental Europe, but not enough demand to fill a 400-seat widebody. These were long and thin routes, long in distance, narrow in volume. Before the 787, they were unviable. With the Dreamliner, United started operating Newark direct to cities that previously required connections. The passenger who needed to stop in London to reach Tel Aviv now flew direct. The one who needed to go through Tokyo to get to Singapore now flew direct. And then something started happening that Airbus hadn't predicted. The point-to-point model didn't need to take down hub and spoke. It started pulling away the most profitable routes, the ones the hubs were feeding on. The 787 didn't just serve traditional airlines, it created an entirely new category. In 2013, Norwegian started flying from Scandinavia to New York with 787s. Fares from London Gatwick to JFK showed up for under $200. A low-cost carrier flying transatlantic, something that didn't exist before because no airplane allowed the math to work. The 787, with its reduced fuel burn and lighter airframe, could operate those routes with a margin that, even if tight, was positive. Noor operated over 30 Dreamliners on intercontinental routes before the pandemic shut down its long-haul operation. The model didn't die. It was replicated by Norse Atlantic, by Play, by JetBlue on transatlantic flights with A321neos. The 787 opened the door. Others walked through it. And while new airlines appeared to exploit point-to-point, the A380's customer base started shrinking. The A380's promise was economies of scale, more seats, lower cost per passenger. But economies of scale assume that each additional unit costs less, and in the real world of aviation, that wasn't happening in a linear way. An A380 burns between 11 and 13 tons of fuel per hour. On a 14-hour flight, that's over 160 tons of jet fuel. But the cost doesn't stop at fuel. Each boarding requires 3 jet bridges and takes 40 minutes longer than a conventional widebody. Maintaining 4 engines costs twice as much as maintaining 2. Spare parts are expensive because the global fleet is small. 251 airplanes versus over 1,000 787s flying. When a part breaks, supply is limited and the price goes up. And there's a cost that never shows up on the purchase spreadsheet: opportunity cost. A gate that accommodates one A380 could accommodate 2 narrow-body flights, 2 takeoffs, 2 revenue streams, 2 frequencies for the passenger to choose from. The hub that invested in A380 infrastructure got locked into it. In February 2019, Emirates, the largest A380 operator in the world, responsible for nearly half of all deliveries, reduced its order from 162 to 123 units. On the same day, it ordered 40 A330neos and 30 A350s, both twin-engine widebodies. Airbus had no other customer with open orders, no backlog, no reason to keep the assembly line running. Tom Enders, Airbus CEO, announced the end of production. Total development cost reached somewhere between 25 and 30 billion euros, more than triple the original estimate. The program needed at least 420 deliveries to break even. It stopped at 251. During the same period, the 787 surpassed 2,400 firm orders. The backlog, the queue of pending deliveries, exceeded 1,000 units. Boeing expanded its Charleston factory to double the assembly line capacity. Even producing 7 airplanes a month with plans to reach 10, demand kept growing faster than production. The difference between the two programs wasn't engineering, it was Thesis. The A380 was built for the world as Airbus thought it would be. The 787 was built for the world as it became. What the 787 proved wasn't that big airplanes are bad, it was that the direction of the market had changed, and that the change was irreversible. Passengers didn't want bigger airports, they wanted fewer airports along the way. Airlines didn't want airplanes with more seats, they wanted airplanes that made each seat work across more routes. That principle extended beyond the 787. The 737 MAX started connecting cities that previously depended on regional hubs. The A321XLR from Airbus itself was designed to fly transatlantic routes in a narrow body, the philosophical opposite of the A380, launched by the same company. The point-to-point paradigm didn't replace the hub, but it reduced the dependence on it. And in doing so, it reduced the reason for the largest airplane ever built to exploit it. In Teruel, in eastern Spain, an airport with no passenger flights operates Europe's largest aircraft storage yard. Inside a hangar 95 meters wide, technicians dismantle a retired A380, engine, landing gear, avionics, piece by piece. In the hangar next door, another A380 receives those same parts to fly again. 80% of the airplanes that pass through there return to service. The rest become survival stock for the ones still flying. In Charleston, South Carolina, Boeing is expanding the 787 factory by over $1 billion. The plan is to double the assembly line. The order queue stretches beyond a decade. Both programs continue generating activity, but one of them generates construction activity. The other generates disassembly activity. Both solve the same problem, keeping airplanes in the air. The difference is the direction.